As you're seeing these headlines cross, you're thinking what?
Well, I think what's unique about these headlines and the story in the Wall Street Journal is the FAA process to date has not been leaky at all. So Boeing issued an 8K. We haven't seen that along the process. So, this is the first time we've seen that sort of level of disclosure in a process that has been, not leaky. So that's what's sort of new here. But, the question is this part of your normal revelation of issues to be fixed? I mean, the flight test process and the recertification process are meant to find these things and address them. So, the question is this out of the norm, or is there something
Carter,
different here?
Carter, when you talk about it being leaky, when I think about leaky, I think about distrust. That's the first thing I think, because when something leaks, it's because there are people in the room who clearly, for whatever reason, don't trust each other. And that, to me, is a new front in where we were, given how close and often critical or criticized that Boeing was and the FAA was for being as close as they were. And now, clearly, there is some kind of divide.
I don't read it that way, Andrew. Not at all, actually.
Okay.
I would say, these are from everything that was disclosed, these are engineering calculations. So, from what the Wall Street Journal reported, there was a speed of response that the current software enabled, the pilots to have. And so, from an engineering standpoint, if you want that to be different, then it requires a different black and white engineering response.
Let's not downplay it. There are engineers at the FAA who clearly thought it was, quote, catastrophic.
We're changing to a different storyline here, but yes, I mean the characterization of hazardous versus catastrophic. I mean, these are all words used in the in the certification process for probabilities associated with failures of systems. I mean, I think in this particular case, and when we're looking at the stock this morning, we're looking at what appears to be a statement by someone at the FAA about what has been uncovered in a very, very lengthy recertification process, and then Boeing responding to that leak in the news with an 8K that says this is part of the process and we're responding in due course.
And how does this therefore play out with all of the other regulatory bodies around the world who are going to be looking at this and going to be asking some of the same questions, I imagine, that we are and then that you are this morning?
Yeah, so this process has been on now for quite some time, right? Boeing has had the FAA has had a Q&A period that has been open where all regulatory bodies can submit questions, and those are coming in handfuls or multiple of handfuls, per day that the FAA and Boeing are responding to, or Boeing is responding to per requests. It's been our understanding that the numbers of questions and the significance of each question has been getting tighter and tighter as that process has gone along, but it's not closed until it's closed. So, is this something that's discovered that needs to be addressed similar to every other question and answer that's been along the process? Yeah, that's certainly the case. But ultimately, I think what matters is the process moving on a trend line towards recertification? And the questions we have to ask is that recertification the FAA and a coalition of some regional certification authorities, or does that include EASA? Does it include the Chinese? Are the Chinese tied up in a trade deal? Those are broader questions that are tougher to answer. But I think what matters is, are you heading down a line of progress that says we are going to return to normalcy in flight at some period of time? I think we're still heading down that path.
Hey, Carter, part of the reason we saw that huge drop this morning, I believe, came after headlines and some reports we heard out of the IATA meeting up in Canada. Part of what they called for was what they call alignment on additional training requirements for Boeing 737 MAX flight crew. And there was immediate speculation that maybe that means more hours training for the pilots, maybe time in simulators, and that could be an expensive proposition. What do you think of any of that? Do you think it's likely?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two separate issues there, Becky, that are actually really important. One, Boeing and Airbus, to a certain extent, don't control the training requirements of, the pilots. I mean, they don't mandate that to the customers, and there are some differences in and around the world. And I think this whole process has revealed whether or not there needs to be some standardization among regulatory bodies, aided by both Boeing and Airbus, to make sure that pilot, proficiency is where it needs to be. I mean, that is an interesting topic, and I think it's one that an organization like the IATA should take up because it's important for passenger safety around the world. As it pertains to cost, and I mean, as we've been talking about for months, I mean, the cost is irrelevant. I mean, if it's 500 airplanes and it's $1 million an airplane, you know, we're talking about a $200 billion stock. $500 million is a drop in the bucket in response to this. You know, how you
but
think
the
about
timing
put this into
in
an
terms
investment.
of getting it back up could be a bigger deal, correct or no?
Certainly should be. I mean, look, every plane that Boeing builds and doesn't deliver is, roughly $25 million that has to sit on the balance sheet, and you can only put so many of those on the ground before you begin to evaluate where you need to do the next cut. So there is a pinch point where you have to decide, do we need to lower production again? I think based on what we can see today, we're trending towards not having to go down those scenarios. But again, this is a data-driven process that we will have to see unfold.